Becoming the go-to person at work rarely feels like a deliberate choice. It happens gradually through a series of small moments where you respond quickly, solve problems effectively, and make other people's work easier. At first, it feels positive. Being trusted feels good. Being relied on feels like a recognition, and you become a person that others turn to when something matters or when something goes wrong. What no one tells you is that this role comes with an invisible cost that grows over time, and it can stall your career. My name is Marcel. I'm a chartered manager who, in the last 2 decades, learned painful lessons on management, and now I share those lessons with others, so you don't have to go through the same learning curve I did. The purpose of the channel is for managers to share their frustrations and solutions. Today, we're going to discuss the downsides of being the go-to person. And by the end of the video, you will have enough knowledge to get the best out of it while avoiding all the traps. Firstly, the go-to person is often not the most senior, but the most reliable. They are the ones who answer messages promptly, who remember details and follow through on completion. Because they reduce friction, work naturally flows towards them. This flow feels manageable in early stages. You tell yourself that things are busy now, but they will settle down later. You assume that your ability to cope is proof that the system is actually working. But over time, the pattern solidifies. And I remember sitting in that phase, actually very content with myself for being such an astute operator, before I started to discover some heavy burdens associated with this role. The first one is that people stop thinking twice before involving you. Questions that could be answered elsewhere now come your way. Decisions that could be made at the lower level get escalated. You become a hub for information, clarification, and reassurance. Now, the problem isn't the volume of the work, but the concentration of it. As more threads run through you, your role becomes less about doing work and more about managing attention. Interruptions increase, context switching becomes constant. Your day fragments into small pieces that never quite come back together. And in this fragmentation is where the exhaustion rises in a way that's difficult to articulate. You are always engaged, always thinking, but rarely finishing. The sense of progress diminishes even as effort increases. What makes this especially challenging is that the signals remain positive because people appreciate you, they thank you, they describe you as invaluable. From the outside, it looks like a success, but internally, it often feels like pressure without relief. So all the positive signals on the outside, but inside, it's all negative. One of the least discussed aspects of being the go-to person is how it alters expectations. Now, your responsiveness becomes the baseline. What once felt impressive now becomes assumed. Any delay feels noticeable, even if it's reasonable, and very quickly you fall victim to your own success. Now, I remember being pulled into the MD's office for an hour-long feedback how I'd been slacking in the previous weeks, despite having higher output than anyone else in the office. This poor performance was against ever so busy me, and not against the average in the company. So this position creates a trap. The more dependable you are, the harder it becomes to slow down without disappointing someone, and the role begins to dictate behavior rather than the other way around. Many people respond by working harder. They squeeze thinking into the edges of the day. They become more efficient in small ways, hoping to stay ahead of the month. And I have to stress that this approach rarely works in the long run. The deeper issue is that being a go-to person often masks systemic gaps. Now, processes are unclear and decisions rise ambiguous. Information is scattered. Instead of fixing those issues, the system relies on one person to compensate. And this reliance feels efficient, at least in the short term. It avoids difficult conversations and structural changes. In the long term, it creates fragility. If everything runs through one person, progress depends on their availability. When they are absent, work stalls. When they are overloaded, quality drops. The organization becomes resilient only on the surface, but brittle underneath. When my son was born, my second hour-long feedback followed very shortly after that, and it was to highlight that I'd been slipping again, which somehow still ended up with me leaving with the third department under my wing. Because, and I quote, "You have to do it for the company, there's no one else to do it. Now, for the individual, this creates a constant sense of responsibility that extends way beyond formal role boundaries. You feel accountable for outcomes you don't fully control and carry knowledge that others don't have. Letting go feels risky, and there's a psychological trap here. This is why many go-to people struggle to delegate or even to step back. They fear things will fall apart, and in some cases, they're right, which is a sign of how much the system depends on one person. Breaking this pattern requires more than saying no. It requires redesigning how work flows, and I was forced to review it myself when pushed to the brink. In reality, this should have been a job of my MD, and it's always senior management's role to ensure that the right allocation of resources is applied and stretch is considered. Nevertheless, I had to do it myself, and I can share the method that I applied then. It starts with noticing what keeps coming to you. Repeated questions, recurring issues, and habitual escalations are clues. They point to areas where clarity is missing or authority is just misaligned. Addressing those root causes reduces demand naturally. When people know where to go, they stop defaulting to you. When decisions are clearly owned, escalation decreases, and there's a lot of trust that we managers have to develop at this stage. This work is less visible than problem solving, but far more impactful. It's like working hours on upgrading the engine of the car. No changes are visible from the outside, but the overall improvement is easily noticeable. There is also an emotional adjustment involved here. Stepping out of the go-to role can feel like a loss. You may worry about being less valued or less relevant. Now, those fears are understandable, especially if your identity has become tied to being indispensable. But the reality is that indispensability is not the same as impact. Being irreplaceable often limits growth, both for you and for others around you. In short, creating systems that function without constant intervention increases overall capacity. It allows you to focus on work that truly requires your judgment rather than just your availability. Not mentioning that you get some thinking time back, and it's really handy for future growth. And again, all this does not mean withdrawing support. It means offering it in more sustainable ways. Teaching rather than fixing, clarifying rather than absorbing, and designing rather than rescuing. And when this shift happens, the work environment changes. Others step in. Confidence spreads. The pressure on you decreases, not because you care less, but because the system carries more of the load. All of a sudden, back then, I had teams working their jobs that previously would have been escalated to me. Sure, mistakes were made, tears were shed, but in the grand scheme of things, after 12 months, it all seemed worth it. Look, I get it. Being the go-to person is often a sign of competence and trust, but it doesn't have to be a life sentence. Understanding the hidden costs allows you to choose a different path. One where your value comes from shaping how work happens, rather than just holding everything together personally like a glue. That shift is rarely dramatic. It happens through small, deliberate changes in how you respond, what you clarify, and where you redirect. If you think that you'll be able to sit down, make a plan on Sunday and change everything on Monday, I can tell you that you probably won't, but that's probably for the better. Being as busy as I was meant I wouldn't have found enough time for such radical changes anyway, and the most I could afford were small adjustments to my behavior daily. And over time, those changes transform the role from a source of constant demand into a position of sustainable influence. And that is what no one tells you about being the go-to person until you're already living it. It's a slow process. Make it deliberate and you'll grow, but as with all things growing, it will take some time. If you found this episode helpful, I recommend subscribing and commenting on how you manage being the go-to person. Let's start the conversation, and I will see you in the next one.